Okay, let's go. We saw in previous classes. You didn't have to be at the previous classes to appreciate today's class. We saw in previous classes that the Gemara and Midrashim have many sources that seem to give credence to astrology. Astrology being the idea that the positions of various heavenly bodies at the time of a person's birth, which is called natal astrology, has an influence on their success in life, their character, their morality, and things like that. But as well, that by looking at these things, we can learn a lot about the person and about world events and about what's going to happen at different times. This is what we saw. And what we said in previous classes was that this is a problem. There's a challenge. The challenge is that how can you say, how can we talk about astrology seem to B'kitzer, we introduced the concept of astrology minus, which means you take out the steroids, you have astrology without the problems. What does it mean without the problems? Number one, you assert that it's very different from prophecy in the sense that you don't really know what's going to happen. It's a major interpretation problem, number one. Number two, at least for Yidden, most shittas say, Ein Mazel Yisrael, which means Torah, Tshuva, Tzedakah, and all these things could change it, so it's not destiny. And Benegea character, everyone agrees that it only gives you an atiyah, it only gives you a potential one way or another way, but you could overcome it, and so therefore it's not a challenge in terms of a person's b'chira chofsh. So, as I said, astrology minus, and this seems to be the overwhelming position that we see in the sources in the Gemara. However, today we're going to see, and we're going to begin with the Rambam. We'll come back to some of the other sources, perhaps, but we're going to begin with the Rambam. The Rambam has a few different collections of letters that were published over the years, and this is a letter that was printed to the community in either Marseille or Montpellier. Either way, it was in France, and it's a long letter, but we're reading on page 5, passage number 30, and this is a very important passage where the Rambam expresses his views on the matter. And he says, Shekol divrei hachoizim b'kechavim, all of the words of the stargazers, shekerheim, they are lies, etel kol bale mada, by any person of knowledge, or any person who understands philosophy. This is a very broad statement. All words, not some, all words. Last time we were saying, a little emes, a little sheker. No, all words of the stargazers are completely false. Now Rambam knows that he has a challenge here because the Gemara seems to give it credence. V'ani oidea she'efsher, I know that it is possible she'techapsu, this is a very interesting lashon. You're going to search v'timtzu, and you're going to find divrei yichidim, lone statements mechachmei ha'emes, of the true wisdom Rabbi Seinu Alei HaMashalim b'Talmud of a Mishnah of a Midrashes. I know that if you look and find, you can find a das yachid about astrology, shedivrei marim, where it seems like they're saying shebe'eis telde shel adam, that when a person is born, garmu ha'kachavim kach v'kach, the stars cause this and that. Don't worry about it, and we'll see why don't worry about it in a second. But even before we get to the don't worry about it, let's unpack this little passage. Rambam doesn't say, I know there are Talmudic statements. I know that if you went, it's like if you searched really hard, right, as if it's not in plain sight. If you went Meshuggah and you started looking right and left and center, then you would find, that's diuk number one. Number two, he calls them divrei yichidim. Divrei yichidim makes it sound like it's just a few statements, and perhaps also from just a few rabbis, when in reality, this doesn't seem to be the case. And he also says, shedivrei marim, that it seems that they're saying. They may not be saying that, it seems like they're saying. Okay, so we already see where he's going. And then the Rambam says, Al yikshazeh beinechem, don't let this bother you? Because the reality is, it's all bonkers. Why? You have these teachings. So here's the letter. It is not a derech halimud to put aside a clear psak and to focus on shakla v'tara. We all know when it comes to psak halacha l'maisa, how do you deal with it? If you have a clear Rav Ashi says something or so and so, and you have another sugya that's going back and forth with a question and answer, you want to paskin, you don't look at that, you look at this, a clear psak din. So just like that is the case, v'chein, so too, ein roi la'adam la'aniach dvarim shal das shekvar nisamsu hara'oyes b'hem. Don't put away things that make a lot of sense that has already been proven. The Yanar Kapamim, don't shake your hands from these V'yitla and then lean yourself on or tie yourself to a Divrei Yachid Min HaChachamim. Allah Shalom. We don't do that. Just like you don't take Halacha L'Maisa, put it away and focus on Shakla V'Tarya. No. So too, you don't follow a Das Yachid against common sense, is what he says. Then he goes further and says, and I've read this letter a number of times. I always thought it reads in a certain way. Recently, someone suggested that there's a possible second reading to what the Rambam is saying. We're in text 30. I don't think that is what he's saying, but I'll give it to you in a moment. But first, let me give you the pashtus, the way it reads. So don't look at the Das Yachid. Why? Why should I look at the Das Yachid? So first of all, because only a Das Yachid. And it goes against what makes sense. But he goes further. This is a very hard statement. Maybe the rabbi who said that, he forgot something when he said it. That's what it sounds like he's saying. Maybe it's a metaphor. We all know that Rambam uses this often, that the Talmudic rabbi spoke in metaphors, so maybe he's saying astrology, maybe it's a metaphor for something. Maybe Amram Lefisha, maybe he only said it because of a unique situation in his day, and because of something that happened. He doesn't explain what that means. Because maybe there was a Maisa Shaya, something happened, and somehow this required the rabbi to say something about astrology, but really it doesn't have truth to it. And then he goes on to build off of the second point, that maybe it's a metaphor. Haloitiru, don't you see? Many psukim in the Torah aren't literal. Like God's eyes aren't literal. God's Hashamayim Kisi Varis Hadoim Ragloi isn't literal. It's a metaphor. Because we know with philosophical proof that it is impossible to interpret it literally, that's why Targum Onkelos, whenever it comes to corporeal descriptions about God, he gives a metaphoric explanation. So the Rambam is a big koch in this, because the Targum Onkelos, he's a very literal translation. You look at him, he doesn't really do much. There's not a lot of color in his interpretation. But one thing he does do is that whenever there's something that's a verb that sounds physical, he'll give a metaphoric translation. For example, Vayera Hashem al Sinai, God descended. Targum Onkelos translates it as V'izkele, he revealed himself. That's a departure for Targum Onkelos. Rambam notices that, and he says the reason is because philosophically we know God can't have a body, so therefore that's enough to say that it must mean it's a metaphor. So too, he says, it could be that these teachings have metaphors here. This is the relevant passage from the Rambam.
3 questions. Did we learn Gemara where it says there's machlekes specifically yesh mazel Yisrael, ein mazel Yisrael?
Yeah.
Literally, the Gemara. This is the topic. So how could you say? I'm saying besides the fact that the Gemara said stories where mazel, they clearly asked the mazel, but it says there's a machlekes in the Gemara. So how can you say does anyone smart wouldn't think that if it's literally a clear front of your face machlekes? Am I missing something, or that's what you were saying?
No. This letter of the Rambam is very challenging. How can we do Das Yachid? If you counted the number of astrological teachings that you had in Chazal,
right, but in a couple. First of all, many times.
But many times it's not Shakalatari.
2 people. But besides,
many times it's not Shakalatari. Many times it's a straight up teaching.
What does initially when Avraham Avinu does? I think he's referring because Gemara used that as a proof that he took them away. He said, "Look in the stargazers and Hashem." That's a clear proof. Against
Ein Mazel Yisrael. Yeah.
Okay.
So Gemara is using that proof of Ein Mazel Yisrael. But remember, even there, Eimazal Yisrael is interpreted
on top,
right, and like he turned the planets around. In other words, it's within the system. It buys into the
shows
system.
That there is, right,
right. If anything, right. So this is a difficult. That's one difficulty with the Rambam. The fact that he suggests that all of this is only a das yachid. Now, there are certain ways you could deal with this. You could say maybe he's only saying it about the element of shebe. If you look at the end of the second paragraph, he says, "I know you can find rabbis who say that be'ez telda shel adam garmu akachav kach v'kach." So maybe he's only applying it to natal astrology that says that you're going to be born with a certain teva in this way, but all the other astrology is okay. But it's hard to say that because look at his first line. Shekol direk, he says the whole thing is sheker. So I don't know. I don't have a good solution for how he says it's divrei yachid. I honestly don't have a good solution. I thought maybe when the Chachamim say Ein Mazal Yisrael, maybe Rambam innovatively interprets it Ein Mazal be'emunas Yisrael. But I don't have a marker for it, so I don't know.
Certain levels are affected by Mazel, certain levels aren't affected by Mazel.
Yeah, but he seems to put the whole thing aside. Yeah.
Are there quotes from the Gemara where they talk dismissively about it?
That's it. There is no open teaching in Chazal that dismisses astrology clearly, outright. There is no passage. So that's the Shverikite in the Rambam. The Rambam is trying to tell us that this that you're seeing is only in Das Yachid. This makes it a little hard. Now the other part is he says something that we're not used to rabbis saying, that maybe a certain Tanan Amor and this Alu Mimenu Davar Ba'is Shah. Mele to say Yesh V'Dvarim Remez, fine. You want to tell me it's a metaphor? Fine. You want to tell me you're Das Yachid? Fine. You want to tell me it's a metaphor? Fine. You want to tell me that maybe he only said it because of Ma'aseh Shahaya? Fine. But to say that he said it and it's Alu Mimenu Davar Ba'is Shah is also very sure. Very sure. And you don't see that Rishonim usually use, and even the Rambam uses type of language about Tanoim and Amoraim. So someone just pointed this out to me recently, that Rabbi Shilat has an edition of the letters of the Rambam, and he suggests a reading that solves this second problem. It's very highly creative. I don't think it's the Pashut Pshat, but I'll give it to you. He says like this. Start in the beginning of the third, in the second line of the last paragraph. Ain't roy for Adam to put Dvarim Shel Das aside and depend yourself on just a Yachid Min HaChachamim. You know why? Because you may be misunderstanding that Yachid Min HaChachamim. She'efshar she'nis alei mimenu from you. What's the Yachid of Divrei Chachamim was saying? Nis alei mimenu from you. Davar Ba'is Shah. Why? What? Nis alei what? Nis'aleim from you that maybe the Yachid Min HaChachamim said it as a metaphor or only said it as a Ma'aseh Shaya. So that's another way of perhaps reading this, and Rabbi Shelat suggests that this is a possible reading, but again, whether it is or not, I'll leave that to you. Okay, the Rambam is not the only one who takes this position. Let's look at the Meiri. The Meiri has two passages. One passage is on the very troubling Gemara that we saw in Moed Katan. The troubling Gemara that we saw at Moed Katan, to remind you, basically says, a rabbi says that Banei Chayim Mezonah doesn't depend on your schus. Depends on why two perfectly righteous rabbis, such different destiny in terms of Banei Chayim Mezonah. Why? He was born under a good star, you were born under a bad star. Says the Meiri on that Gemara. Va'al Yachush L'masha Omru Kan Chaya Banei Mezonah La B'schusa Talya Milsa Mazal. Don't look at this Gemara where it tells you that this is Tali in the Mazalis. Why? Ki u'maimer yochid. Zadas yochid. Lo yizbalu darchei adas v'shum panim. Religion cannot tolerate this. To understand why? Religion cannot tolerate the idea of there's no schar neinesh, essentially. The whole concept of if you do mitzvahs, the Eibusher gives you an added bracha, and chas v'shalom fakert, that all falls away. If you say no, lo depends on your mazel, so religion can't tolerate this. So don't pay attention to this. And it's das yochid. Obviously, he's aware of this letter of the Rambam, and he's using that same language. It's das yochid. Then he goes on to say something very interesting. The weakness of this teaching is when we learn here why the rabbi said it. In other words, who's the one who said it? Was Rabbah? think it was Rava. Rava. We didn't just have Rava coming along and saying, by the way, it's Taloi, Bani Chaim Zayna is Taloi in Mazel, not in Tzchus. He brought evidence. The evidence undermines. That's what Meiri is going to say. Why? What was the evidence? Because Rava saw two great rabbis, in his mind, they were equal. One had 60 years, one had 40 years, one had many weddings, one had many funerals, one had a lot of food, one had no food. So what brought him to his statement? Because he saw injustice in the world. When people see injustice in the world, that has brought a lot of people to come up with, I'll use respectable language, but to bring out the point, warped theories. A lot of warped theories were born out of the problem of bad things happening to good people. A lot. If you were to make a list, it would go on and on and on. Why? Because Taka M is a problem. It's something we can't understand. So it's a big problem. And because it's a problem, people start thinking. They think, it leads them into stupid explanations. And the Meiri is saying that's what happened over here. Thank God that we know the circumstance of why Rava said this, because that itself undermines the validity of his statement. It could be that, I wonder, because he uses the word over here, the Rambam said three things. Besides for it's a yachid, maybe Nisale Mimenu, he forgot something. Maybe it's a remez, or maybe it was a Ma'aseh Shoya. What does Ma'aseh Shoya mean? The Meiri, maybe, I don't know for sure. We know the Meiri knew the Rambam's material. We knew he knew the Rambam's farm and the Rambam's letters as well. In fact, he lived in the region where this letter was sent. It is possible the Meiri here is giving interpretation to what Rambam means by Ma'aseh Shoya. The rabbi said it because there was a Ma'aseh Shoya of a terrible tragedy happened. A whole bunch of people were having sveikis and this, and they couldn't understand, they couldn't deal with it. So he got up and said, by the way, he had a negative mazel or whatever it is, and somehow that made people feel better, and so he went home, but it's not a real thing. It could be the Meiri is using that to explain what the Rambam is meaning. But on the broader point is, the Meiri seems over here to be rejecting, it's not 100% clear, but at least this teaching of Chazal about astrology, the one that your success in life depends on mazel, he rejects it, and he says that it's a das yachid. This is true, you could say it's Rava is only one person, it's a das yachid, and so we'll put that together in the Rambam's camp. Now the truth is, we have another teaching from the Meiri that is not about mazalis per se, but it's about a different issue. You have a concept in Gemara. There are a number of different, some people would call them superstitions, or some people call them paranormal phenomena. One of the things is called zugos. What's zugos? Zugos is the idea, it really relates to a whole other topic of shadim. But the idea of shadim is that there are entities that are in a degree physical, that are present in this physical world, and they could cause harm to people, which is not our subject for today. But they get attracted to certain things. One of the things they get attracted to is things in pairs. They get attracted to things in pairs. So therefore, when the Chachamim made a takana about Dalet Koises, there was a genuine concern of Yidden and Bavel. 4 cups, you crazy? I'm going to do 4 cups. I'm going to put 4 cups on the table. Chas v'shalom Hashin Dalet can uns happen. That was the fear of Zugas. And so what did the Chachamim say? The Chachamim there said, they actually said 2 things. First they said, Man de loy kapit kaptina made. Man de loy kapit loy kaptina. What does that mean? That somehow, if you care about the thing of 2, then the demons care about it too. But if you completely ignore it, then the demons don't. They're not going to come to you. That's one thing they said.
That's a great answer.
But another, right? So it gets a whole other thing. It got applied later. The Gemara originally had it only for Zugos. It got applied much later to Ayin Hara as well, meaning in the last 100 years. Then you have another thing. Shomer mitzvah lo yedara. If you're doing a mitzvah, then nothing's going to happen. So Chachamim said, don't worry about it. So the Meiri doesn't like Zugos. Doesn't like it. Meiri thinks that Zugos, it's not a real fear. But on the other hand, he sees the Chachamim grappling with it. So look what he says, and then we'll see whether he may say something similar about astrology. Says the Meiri, Bechama Makoim is Biyarnu. This is before he talks about the din of Zugos. Shab Oisanas Manim in those Talmudic times. The people, the Jewish people, followed the masses. The masses is a derogatory term in this context of folk beliefs. Kalachoshim, alachash is the idea that you could kind of whisper certain things, and that itself has a certain power that can have over a person or over different things. Of the nachashim, that's other occult activities, and other activities that the masses engage in. Now, says the Meiri, if there was avodah zarah in here, Chachamim came and said you're not allowed to do it, or the Torah said you're not allowed to do it. If there was Darchei Amoiri here, and that is, again, it's holding what's the difference, but this was a Gentile thing, and you end up assimilating with them, and it's related. Also, the Chachamim said, not allowed. But if it didn't have Srach, Avodah Zarah, and Darchei Amoiri, Leichashu ben Chachamim, Le'akram Chachamim, okay, you want to believe it, you can believe it. One of the things, not the only one of the things, people then were careful about pairs. So therefore, they didn't want people to do 5 cups, and they didn't want people to do 3 cups, and they were scared that people were going to do that. So because the people, I think it means the people, were so used to it that they lost his time to different. They have to explain what justifies you giving us 4 cups. They said, I said Shemer Mitzvah, that's not what I meant. I mean, Leil Shemurim, they said, Leil Shemurim. I gave you the wrong teaching before. Leil Shemurim, it's a night of protection. Laila Meshumar Rabam and Mazikin, there's a special koyach that this night has, that it's Leil Shemurim, you don't have Mazikin, you don't need to worry about it. What is Meiri saying over here? Meiri is introducing us to a concept that you wouldn't know. You learn Gemara, you see, it's so much Zugos, and again in Zugos, there's a chash. Meiri is presenting a very interesting argument. He says the rabbis didn't believe it. He says the rabbis didn't believe it. Nor then. They're going to fight with the people. They're not going to fight with the people. They'll present Judaism in a way that is compatible with people who believe in Zugos too. Why? Because I have to fight with you about Tefillin, I have to fight with you about Tzitzis, I have to fight with you about Shabbos, and I'm going to do this too. That's not, you want to believe it, no problem. I'll explain Yiddishkeit in terms that work for you today. And the truth is that rabbis in all generations are doing this. You explain Judaism in terms and dealing with the sensitivities and the sensibilities that people have. So he's suggesting this as a general principle. He applies it to Zugos. One could therefore suggest that he doesn't say it clearly about astrology, but you can enter into a conversation, and this will give us new light into the concept that I'm calling astrology minus. In other words, full-blown astrology on steroids. The rabbis are like, the Chama are like, oh my God, this is Hepech Pirachoshes, Hepech Nevuah, Hepech Scharven Oynish, Hepech all this. We can't let that fly. Not happening. So we have to say, no, cut it back. Beyond that, okay, say there. If you want to believe that they have influence, but believe you have influence. And not only that, when I get up to say a Dvar Torah on Parshas thing, I'll say it in astrological terms as well about Avram or whatever. I may mean whatever, something else. I mean deeper, Teva and Lamaila Teva. I think there's other terms. But I'll use this because this is the way people are thinking and doing now. Now, is this correct? Correct. This is the Meiri's approach. Is this a universal approach? No. Most of the Rishonim didn't adopt this approach. This, I think, is easier, though, than Rambam saying, Yachid. Rambam saying, Nef'ali mimenu. Okay, a metaphor, fine. Fine. But the Rambam, you see where the Rambam's trying to go. I think you could take this Meiri about Zugos, which he says is a general principle, and he says anything that wasn't Avodah Zarah or Darchei Amoiri, they're not fighting, and if I can't, we'll work within your system. You're scared about Dal Koisis, instead of telling you that the Zugos is baloney, I'll say no problem, tonight's Leil Shemurim, you don't have to worry about it. So this is another way, and you could put this together with the Rambam and Meiri, and this is where you walk away with an alternative to everything that we learned about in the previous classes.
The whole astrology exists, or they're just saying it's not off the Torah?
No, denying that there's any validity. In the Lashon of the Rambam, Sheker, Ehimei Tobala, that it's not true. So you would say, what about the Chatumim in Mitzrayim? The Zacha Chatume Mitzrayim. So first of all, Rambam could say, doesn't say in the pasuk they were using astrology. Okay, but we know astrologers existed in Egypt. We know that even outside of the Torah in Babylonia, we know astrologers existed. Rambam's approach is it was all fake. They would say things, and they would say sometimes the predictions were right, sometimes they were wrong. You say a general, the way these types of things could work. Where you say, if you look at your horoscope, you'll see it's not possible for it to be wrong, right? Do you look? You ever?
It's been throughout the ages.
Yeah.
You can't deny it. There's something.
Is it problematic?
Here, let me just tell you my horoscope for today. You'll understand what I'm saying.
To say that a baby's going to be born.
Which one's Sagittarius?
What I like is like your whole life, Lev Shemar.
Okay, here's the horoscope.com. This is my horoscope according to them because I'm Sagittarius. Today the people around you could seem much more serious than usual. You could even decide to get away from them and go hide out just for the day, for example, in the movie theater watching an afternoon film. But you won't find the movie you want to see. Don't try and run away from the gravity of the moment. You may become even more serious than the people you are running away from. So, such vague...
Is it problematic to say that just like there was like folk medicine in the time of the Gemara, that this was like in the category of a folk medicine that in the time of the Rambam was already looked at as like at the time of the Chacham they took it seriously because that was like the science of the time.
The Meiri is saying different. The Meiri is saying that the Chacham didn't take it seriously.
I know, but I'm just asking.
What you're saying about the medicine is different. That the Rambam does say, the Rebbe has a few sikhs about this, and the Rebbe does not accept this approach, that the refuahs and the shas never worked. And that was just the best knowledge that they had at that time. The Rebbe rejects this approach in the spring of 1983, Shavuos time.
I thought the Rebbe's all Rambam. We're like all Rambam. Aren't we like, what happened? No one tells you about this. Rejected this.
The Rebbe said, yeah. You see, it's a hard. The Sikha that Rebbe Lakut Sikha Chelech of Gimel Shavuos about this, the Refuah Shebeshas. The Rebbe goes with a different approach. Mishtanu Ativin. Mishtanu Ativin was that it once was, and it's a Torah medicine. But then Mishtanu Ativin. But that gets into a whole other subject. I mean, either you're saying further that Chachamim themselves didn't believe in it. But then they're like, okay, fine. You would say.
You wanted explanation for you're saying that the Rambam's lesson is hard to.
They didn't know.
Maybe you say.
Okay, but Isa Shah. All right. Okay. Look, the Rambam is a what? Yeah.
I would apply to the Rambam the same things that he applies to others. Meaning, could be in the Rambam's time, when everything was very rational, but this Arab movement, so he had to bring everything that way. So he actually too, that he will be at that in all the Sinyanim. And you see a pattern in Karbonis as well. When he says Karbonis is the only time in Beit HaMikdash, but it's Mishagat, they shouldn't do it, and they grow screaming very strong against it. I would apply this about the Rambam and the Rambam's time.
That's good.
It's interesting you say that because one of the times that Rebbe dealt with this type of issue, in these Sikhs in Mem Gimel, he said that what they said about the Chachamim, you could say it about themselves. Mamish this sprach. Look in Nosai Mem Gimel or something like that. Rings of Mamish this sprach that you're using now. Okay. Bottom line. This not only is the Rambam in a letter, it's also a Rambam Mishnah Torah. It's a halacha. The Rambam passes this way. Look at number 33. The Rambam says, don't look, because we're going to have to start cutting out sources. I need to summarize. You'll trust me. The Torah says, Lo Yisayinenu. The shaila is, what does Lo Yisayinenu mean? What activity is the Torah banning? There's different shittas. The Rambam learns that Lo Yisayinenu is astrology. What does that mean? When you say, this day is a good day, because he uses the word, Istagninus. When you are using astrology to say, this day is good, this day is bad, then he says, you're over the lav. And he says, just speaking it. An astrologer is over the lav, he says. And he goes and he says that the whole thing is false. The Ksilim think it's Divrei Emes. And then he says, if you go to an astrologer and he tells you, go to work an hour early tomorrow morning, because I see in your star and whatever, and you go to work an hour early, and theoretically if there's Hasra, you get Malkus Minat Torah, because you're over a lav Minat Torah. Okay. Now, there are other shittas that don't agree with this. Lo Yisayinenu, they learn, it's not talking about astrology. It's something else, not negeh for us here now. It's not talking about astrology. And so there is no lav in the Torah for astrology. This is the Rishonim who don't go with the Rambam's approach, don't go with the Meiri's approach, and they generally accept astrology as something valid, but astrology minus, as we spoke about. So what do? They, if it's a valid thing, the Torah is going to forbid it. If it has, so that what they do is, they are within this category of two different approaches. They point to a pasuk that says, Tamim tiyeh Hashem alekecha. What is Tamim tiyeh Hashem alekecha? Is you should be wholehearted with Hashem, and there's a Ramban al pasuk, and he interprets this, don't go to astrologers. They have true information. The system is true, so they can help you out. Don't go to them anyway. Why? Because first of all, there's an interpretation problem. How do you know that the interpretation they're giving you is right? We saw last time they could see one thing and interpret it totally wrong. Number one. Number two, don't forget, your extra tzedakah changes it. So why are you going to go to them? Just doesn't make any sense. So don't go to them. Tamim tiyeh Hashem. Is it asur? I can't say it's asur. And remember, you have all those rabbis who heard from astrologers. Rabbi Kiva heard from an astrologer. Rabbi Yosef heard from an astrologer. So I'm going to say there's a lav, no lav. Should you go? No. Tamim tiyeh Hashem alekecha. You think that the Eibusha is going to take care of you, and you don't worry about it. So you have no inyan of going there. This is the shitta of the Ramban. So this is shitta number 2. Shitta number 3 is the shitta of the Rashba. The shitta of the Rashba is very similar. He says, Tamim tiyeh Hashem alekecha. You don't ask. Don't go to them. You're relying on the Eibusha for the same reasons. That's what they say is not definite. And not only is it not definite, you do another tzedakah, you could change it. So just do that instead of going to the astrologer. But then he goes on to say an amazing thing. If you happen to hear something from an astrologer, you're not allowed to not listen. Yes. You're not allowed to not listen. Why? He's coming from Rabbi Yosef in the Gemara. Rabbi Kiva, they didn't ask. We don't see in the Gemara they asked. But we saw that they heard, and we saw Avraham Avinu also engaged. He looked. If you see something, you're not allowed to cover your eyes. And he said you're not allowed to go keneged the mazel. And here, if they told you don't go to work at 8 o'clock, you're not allowed to go to work at 8 o'clock. You need to wait till 9 o'clock. Look at this. You don't have this so many areas in Yiddishkeit. We have these three approaches to the astrology. 2 are within the system that accepts it as valid, and then we'll have 2 shittas, and 1 rejects it. The one that rejects it says it's all baloney. Because it's all baloney, so therefore it's asur, and it's issa deraisa, and it's loisai nenu, and it's malchus. You're not allowed to say something, and you're not allowed to act on it. This is the Rambam's position. Then you have within the system that accepts it to move on with astrology minus. So here you have 2 approaches. One says still ignore it. Not because of a lav, but because Tamim tiyeh Hashem alekecha, be focused on the Eibusha, and He's going to take care of you, and everything's good. And the other one says, no. If you heard something, you need to take it seriously. I think the yesod of the machlokes between those 2 views is something that we alluded to in a previous class, and that is the mazel said that the snake is coming to Rabbi Kiva's daughter on the day of her wedding, and is going to kill her. The mazel said that. What was necessary in order to nullify it? Was there some drastic, huge, out-of-the-ordinary type of mitzvah, and thereby bringing a miracle? Or you said sugazunt when a Jew sneezed, and that itself is a schos that could perhaps be good enough or whatever. So I think that those 2 views depend on that. The Rashba, who's the one who says, if you heard, you got to take it seriously, when you look at his language, he says, yeah, your schos could make a nes lipa'amim. Okay. If your schos makes a nes lipa'amim, then it makes a lot of sense to say that that's something to rely on, and so therefore, if you heard something, you need to follow what they said. Why can't you ask? There it gets a little funny. Maybe you should even go ask. No, Tamim tiyeh Hashem alekecha. You can't ask. I can't say I fully understand that distinction. The Ramban and other Rishonim make it sound like, yeah, there's a default, the snake was supposed to come. But 1 penny to tzedakah knocks it off. So it makes no sense. Even if you heard something, you befedish don't have to listen. You'll say Krishna Shalamita with 1 extra moment of kavana, and you knock it off. So you shouldn't keep it. You shouldn't have anything that you need to worry about the next day. What is the Shulchan Aruch pasuk? Shulchan Aruch addresses this issue. Look at number 34. Ein shoyalim b'choizim b'koichavim. We don't ask. Now, there's no argument about that. The Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Mechaber, wanted to be safe. He gave words that no one disagrees with. Ein shoylin. Okay. Is it true? Is it false? Is it a lav? Is it not a lav? No, it doesn't tell you. If you heard something, do you listen? Doesn't say anything. Ein shoylin b'chazan kechavin. Why is that? I think he's.
That's what Rashba said. Rashba said you're not allowed to ask, but if you ask. But
he doesn't say. He just says Ein shoylin b'chazan kechavin. You learn weiter. Then the Ramah makes a hagah. And as Levi is saying, the Ramah is going with the Rashba. Look what the Ramah says. Oh, Mishum Shenamar Tamim Tim Misham Lekecha. So first, the Ramah is clarifying, not Rambam, not Loisa Inenu. You could say it's Meduyik in the Rabbi Yosef Karo, because he doesn't say the word Osir, he says Ein, but I'm not sure. You have to really know Shulchan Aruch and Klalei Shulchan Aruch to know if Ein versus Osir is a real thing or not, and I don't know. But the Ramah clearly says, it's Mishum Tamim Tia, nothing to do with Loisa Inenu. Then the Ramah goes weiter. This is the Ramah, this is not the Mechaber. But Masha Odam Yedei Ashu Keneged Amazel. If you know, lo yasa, v'lo yismach ala nes. Again, he's used. The idea is your schos is a nes. It's like a huge deal to overcome it. So this is the Ramah's approach. What was the Rebbe's approach? Let's jump to text 38. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to find, and then we'll find it. We're going to find that the Rebbe seems to go what I'm calling the Ramban's approach, not the approach in the Shulchan Aruch. Although the Rebbe sometimes quotes the Shulchan Aruch, the Rebbe never says, and people wrote to the Rebbe about astrology and the worries and horoscopes and should look into this. The Rebbe always says, the Rebbe doesn't say it's Asr Min HaTorah. He doesn't say it's false. Don't say that. Doesn't say it's false. Doesn't say it's Asr Min HaTorah. He doesn't say, so that Rambam language is not there. On the other hand, he never says, but if you heard, then Ein Yismach Alani. So it really fits mostly with the Ramban Shitta of maybe there's truth here, but the Schusim are you're so easy to come by to override this stuff that a Pasha doesn't make any sense to be looking at this. So let's look at some of the letters of the Rebbe. 38. The Ma'ana L'Michtavam Miyoim 2:9 by Shalem L'Mazalam. You ask about your mazel. Kvar Nemar Tamim Tia Im Hashem Alekecha. So, ein inyan b'drisha l'mazhol asidus. There's no inyan in looking into this. Kim laleches lebetach b'derech haman. Go in the way of Hashem, which is the derech of Torah mitzvah. Follow what it says in Shulchan Aruch. Va'az uftachnu asher ein mazel Yisrael. Then we're promised ein mazel Yisrael. What does ein mazel Yisrael mean? The Rebbe doesn't explain, but we learned. Oz ein mazel Yisrael is that the mitzvahs override the mazel, and all the good things are going to happen to you.
Where's the origin of ein mazel Yisrael?
Ein Mazel Yisrael in the sheet is text 7. Where is it? 18. We spoke of last week we spoke about. Ein Mazel Yisrael was the idea that you could override destiny, rich, poor, long life, short life, all that stuff through Ma'asen Tov. Okay, next 39. Someone wrote that he thinks it's his mazel and goyrol to.
You finished 38. Were you middle or am I wrong?
No, I kind of finished. I didn't read the last line, but we.
Rounding.
Yeah. Okay. Asher lepele godol al anash bechlal uviyichud al atmimim laharba is dvarim keilu lekoisam. To write for a anash, a chassid, to be writing about that this is my mazel and goyrol. Babis shosha barer pirshu Rabbi Seinu as divrei Razal ein mazel Yisrael benegel a mazel kipshutoy ein kipshutoy. There's no mazel. She'ena b'mitzias. Okay, it's not there. You could say this goes a little stronger. It almost sounds like it's denying the whole thing. Okay. Uvenegel a mazel amiti hapirish ayin mazel Yisrael. The Rebbe is saying there is a chsidish inyan of mazel, nothing to do with a heavenly body, and that is. The ayin, the Eibishter is the Mazel Yisrael, is the Mashpia to Yidden. Okay, English letter. I duly receive your letter in which you ask about the Jewish attitude to horoscopes, etc. Generally, astrology and the like play no part in Jewish life. As it is also written in the Holy Scriptures, of the signs in heaven you shall have no fear. This was a pasuk that was brought up. What do you know? But it's quoting a pasuk in Yirmiyah that 18 that we just cited. Ein Mazel Yisrael quotes that. On the contrary, we have the commandment you should be wholehearted with your God, that's Tamim Tiyah, which is also quoted in Shulchan Aruch, so now he calls Shulchan Aruch. This means that the Jew has to have complete and wholehearted faith in God and his benevolent providence, which extends to each and every one individually. As for taking interest in horoscopes purely as a curiosity and the like, as you mentioned, it seems like this person was like, it's not about me and where I'm going, it's not personal relevance, I'm just interested in the topic. Says the Rebbe. Pretty classic response here. This would amount to a waste of interest, which should be channeled in a more productive way. For it is explained in Chassidus that God has not given man an excess of capacity, nor a deficiency of it. In other words, every person, and especially a Jew, has been given, probably, a certain amount of capacities and powers of concentration, all of which must be utilized in the fulfillment of his purpose in life on this earth, namely to live in accordance with Torah and mitzvahs and to disseminate justice and righteousness. It follows from the above that if a person should divert any of his capacities, thoughts, and concentrations on a useless thing, that's a strong word, even if it be harmless, it is nevertheless harmful in the sense that he would thereby create a deficiency in the area in which it is important and necessary for him. In other words, there's no such a thing as it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. You're wasting your time. You're wasting your time. Now, what if this Yid said, yeah, but for me, it's like it calms me down, and it brings a hobby which brings me peace of mind or whatever, and that enables me to learn a Blatt Gemara no less than... So I don't know if the Messias is outside, but this is what you have here. Finally, one more Maina, just the first paragraph of this, 41. This is a Maina from the Rebbe in Tavshim Memches to someone who wrote, it looks like a book or article on astrology. The Rebbe wrote, L'kosvei Eidos Astrologia, Yedua Machlokas Deil Yisrael Yirei Shamayim. But it's interesting. Mina kasa la kasa, extremes. Mea Rambam sheshoylo legamri. Vad le'ele sheba'asmam oskuba v'kosu svarim kedei landa l'chein al-fisa. The other extreme is you had Gdei Yisrael who actually wrote svarim on astrology, and they taught it. And how many times do you see in Yonim of Mazel Maidim in different Pirush HaMikra and in different things like that, right? This is what the Rebbe is referring to. It's just an interesting thing. There was a machlokas min hakotza al hakotza in this area. It's a fascinating thing that we end up having this type of division.
Isn't not making Kiddush connected to astrology?
Absolutely. So, not making Kiddush in a nutshell, we spoke about it. You were here, Zalman, I think. About 2 years ago, we gave a shir on the topic. In a nutshell, it goes like this. The mazel shoyz is every hour is a different mazel. And so, Friday, if you do the math from creation, Friday, between 6, in the 6th hour after Chatzois, the mazel maidim is, so to speak, having its dominant influence. And we don't want to be makabel Shabbos under the influence of Mazel Maidim. And the Rebbe brings this in a Sikh and Tavshim Memches when he talks about birthdays. And birthday is Mazal Goyver. You can't deny Mazalis and say Mazal Goyver. The Rebbe denies, tells you not to look, astrology, the Rebbe says out. But the idea, it's not something we engage in at all. It's like the Ramban. Not like the Rashba, that if you happen to hear something, the Rebbe seems to go in the derech of Ein Shoyalim, period. That's it. But that's only B'negeya astrology in terms of determining world events. But the Rebbe says B'negeya Mazali Goiver, which that means that you're born between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock on Shabbos, so you're Mazel Maidim, because that's the hour of the thing. And then that Mazel Maidim becomes a Mazel for the whole day, which is another thing that we're not going to get into, but the Rebbe explains that the Mazel Shah becomes a Mazel the whole day. So now Mars, so to speak, is there helping you and giving you extra power on your birthday. That's the B'pashtus, what it is, and this is, if you look at the Sikha, Tavshim Memches, the Rebbe there says, a Mazel Yisrael, in footnotes. Yeah, it doesn't mean it doesn't apply. It just means you could override it or whatever. So for good things, which is helping you out, look how the Mazel is there. A Mazel Yisrael is that don't worry about it. You're going to say to Gesund, to Nachayid. You're going to smile at Nachayid. You're Mavatal 100 Gzeiris on the Mazalis with like this. No problem. I think that's the way that Rebbe learns. But if the Mazel is here to help you, what's the problem? So we say it gives you koyach on your birthday. Benegea, Kiddush between 6 and 7, it's its own category. And the Rebbe brings it in the footnotes over there in that sikha as well, as a raya that you can't say like the Rambam. The Rambam wanted to say that maybe some astrological teachings, one of his approaches is only a metaphor. So the Rambam could say that, because the Rambam doesn't have an issue with Kiddush between 6 and 7. The Chumrah started much later, it's 1600s. But the Alter Rebbe has it in Shulchan Aruch. Because the Alter Rebbe has it in Shulchan Aruch, therefore you can't say it's a metaphor, because you can't say halacha is a metaphor. And so therefore the Rebbe brings that in the thing. So within that sikhi you definitely see mazales, the concept of the heavenly bodies having an influence and associated with the time of birth is legitimate. The concept of dealing with that or thinking about that or having that therefore turn into horoscopes, astrology, whatever, for the Rebbe, off the table. That's the way it seems to be the Rebbe's shitta about this issue. Okay. Now, by the way, I summarized some of the texts that we didn't learn, like in the section Yud Beis, I just summarized for you. Now, okay, what are we going to do about if you go back to all the Talmudic teachings that we had before, we now have a derech on how to deal with it. Either you're saying the Rambam's approach is to basically deny the validity behind them. And the Chazal general consensus approach, together with most of the Rishonim, is to say, beferish, with all the qualifications that we spoke about, including the major qualification that this is not something that we get involved in or deal with. There's one issue though. That is that Gemara, where we said, Banei Chaim Ezoina doesn't depend on your schos, it depends on mazel. That's a problem. Why is it a problem? Because I said astrology is okay in Chazal and the Rishonim as long as it's astrology minus. What did that mean? It means that your maisim could overcome the mazel. But here we see it said lav b'mazal v'schus atalia milsa elo b'mazal. And mamish sounds the opposite. And mamish sounds like your schus can override the mazel. So that's one issue that still has to be resolved. So here are the options. Option number one. This is the shitta of Rab Chanina. We know that Rab Chanina held Yesh Mazel Yisrael. What does Yesh Mazel Yisrael mean? For Bechira, I said last time, for Bechira Chafshis, you're free to choose whatever you want. But the idea of your longevity and your success and your family and those things, it's totally in the Mazel. Torah Tshuva stuck on all those things. What he would say is like this: if you gave stucca, you get wings, you're able to fly. You turn into 15 feet tall because you want to be 15 feet tall. It's not shaykh. Why? Because your genetic makeup is such that you can't be 15 feet tall and you can't fly. I tell you the truth. Sorry, can't do that. It accomplishes other things, but that it can't do. So Rab Chanina would say, you have Chira Chavshis, the mazel can't force that. But, yes, Benegea, your longevity, Banei Chaim Ezayin, and those types of things, sorry, the Eibusha created the world, he created Teva, he created certain ways, and it's pretty much locked in. So that's one option. If so, Rava then, who says the statements following Rab Chanina, then it's clearly a Das Yachid. None of the Rishonim pretty much hold like this. So it's just a Das, it's that. So that's a solution number one. Solution number two is the Taich. It's not only Schos, the Mazel also plays a role, but this, if you have you know what, I'm going to forget that. It's a little bit of a kvetch. But there is another approach that you have. In Chassidus brings two different approaches to deal with this problem. One is, what Rava was saying is, of course, we had Rabba and Rav Chisda. So who is the one that suffered? Rabba. Of course, Rabba had a lot of schusim. And that could have easily changed his Banei Chaim Ezayin. Easily. He didn't want it to. It was a choice. And so therefore it ended up being that he didn't invoke his lav b'schus atalim milsa. It wasn't about his schus, it was about his mazel because he chose not to bring in his schus. As far as I know, it's a chiddush to the Reb Marash. The Reb Marash learns this way. Look at number 42. Great rabbis who live terribly. They didn't want their Torah to translate into physical benefit in this world. Okay, let's skip that. When Rava said it's not contingent on schus, what does that mean? Schus doesn't inevitably change into a good Banei Chayim Ezoina because we ask you. And if he doesn't want to, so then he won't accept it. So then that ends up being a solution. La'elam, just like Rabbi Akiva's daughter, and just like all the other stories and cases, and just like the Rebbe says in the letters, that you're doing another mitzvah, you cancel. That's if you want it. But if you say no, so then it's not canceled, and the default stays, and that's how the Reb Marash is a big chiddush. You don't have this a lot, but this is how the Reb Marash explains that issue. But the Reb Marash actually goes further in another mimer and offers a different interpretation. Bagdama, and this obviously will conclude. But then when Chassidus offers a pnimistic interpretation, it usually does not negate the kipshuta. I'll give you an example. The Kaf Aleim Har Kegigis. Did God literally hold the mountain over them? So you could Chassidus teaches a whole thing, a Gilei Lekut, whatever. Chassidus the Maimer does not say it wasn't literal. The Maimer doesn't say it. Now we can sich dingen. I know that once by the Sudas upstairs, Rabbi Gutnick from Australia said that in Telz they learned it Shaloi K'Pshuta, and then I was like, why? Like, what's forcing you to say it's like K'Pshuta? And they got into a conversation. But one thing's for sure, Chassidus doesn't say that it's not K'Pshuta. It offers a pnimistic opinion. Now we can come and we can argue if whether it happened literally or not. But at least Chassidus definitely doesn't say it didn't happen literally. This is true in most cases. This Maimer Chazal, the Reb Marash comes and says, by the way, this is not talking about astrology. This is not talking about the stars and the moon. When Rava said, Banei Chayim Ezoina, Lav b'schus Atalia Milsa, Ella b'mazal Atalia Milsa, he was not talking about the mazalas. Look at 43. Look at the second line of 43. The Eina Pirush b'mazala da'ainu ha'mazalas hakvoim b'gaval. This is not the heavenly bodies of Mazel Machir or Mazel Mashir, where we speak about the fact, and it exists, and I'm not denying that Mazel Machir, Mazel Mashir, but this is not what we're talking about here. So what are we talking about? HaPirush b'Mazal Atalia, Hainu b'Mazal ha'elyin, Shubchinas Eidin Sof, Mashal Amayla, Mivchinas Chachma. And here he goes on to give an explanation. It goes basically as follows. He explains, we know in the Lashon Chassidus, there's a likus of Ishtalshalos, and there's a likus Shalamayla Meseder Ishtalshalos. A likus of Ishtalshalos, the definition is that it's definition. It's all about God now expressing himself in a limited way. One of the features of God expressing himself in a limited way is people get very bitzimsum, lefi erech, what you deserve. And deserve not what you think is deserved, but what you deserve, aliba de emes, and that's a lot less than what we probably think we end up deserving. And that's the system of Ishtalshalos. Banei Chayim Ezoina, the Eibusher doesn't give that the Hagbala of is mashpiatas. Rather, he keeps it in the world of Eren Sof Shalifnei. He keeps it in the zone of Eren Sof Shalifnei Seder Ishtalshalos, where there is more bleakvul, and there is more forgiving, and there is more giving barchava, and that's the mucker of where Banei and Chayim and Zayna comes from, because there's a better chance that human beings would have. Why? Because there's bleakvul. Bleakvul means no definition, no limitation. Good and bad, in a sense, are equal on that level, and so therefore you get even a Rasha, you could be mashpia to a Rasha, something like that. And this is the pshat he learned here. He says, Banei Chayim Ezoina lai b'schus Atalia Milsa. Don't think it's your schus, which is the Indian in Ishtalshalos, which is only going to get you a limited amount. B'mazal Atalia Milsa, in Eidin Sof, it's Hechem and Seder Ishtalshalos. And these things, these are the Gimel Mafteches that God keeps himself, doesn't give it to a Malach. He relates it to that. God keeps us within the zone of the infinite, and this is how he interprets it. This is a very unique situation, and we're offered a new way of understanding this Gemara. the concept of Mazalis overall stays the same. He's just an isolated passage. We have the Reb Marash taking one astrology passage and then removing it from the Maseches Astrology and putting it in Maseches Arusaf, which therefore solves the problem. So in summary, about this troubling statement in Moed Katan, we really learned a few things. We learned that maybe it's the view of Rabbi Chanina, which holds Yesh Mazel Yisrael, about which we also saw Meiri saying, by the way, it's a terrible statement. He said that. He said, terrible statement. Look what brought it about. Obviously, it's a terrible statement. Okay, so you have the Meiri saying terrible statement. Maybe it's Rabbi Chanina's shita that certain things are locked in Emal Asad. And we had two Beyurim from the Reb Marash. One was, it's because he chose that his Torah Tshuva and Staka shouldn't affect the outcome, or that we're learning that has nothing to do with the Hemshech HaGemara. It has nothing to do with the 60 to 40. It all has to do with An and Saf, Hechem from Seder Ishtalshalos, and it's nothing to do with astrological matters. Was sagst du?
Two questions. One is, doesn't Taisa over there ask, how does he say Emaz Yisrael? We learned it, and Taisa says, with a nest, you could. Meaning, why? Taisa could answer what you said. He goes like one on Tana.
Yeah.
Taisa the Farish doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, that was the other answer that I did. Taisa doesn't want to learn. He doesn't want to learn Rab Chanina. To go to say that Rava holds like Rab Chanina is a big chiddush.
Right.
Why? Because so many of the earlier rabbis disagreed with Rab Chanina. And Rabbi Kiva, and this and that. And to then come along and to say that Rava, third, fourth generation Amoira, is holding like Rab Chanina is shver. So therefore, Tosfos does. He says the answer that I started saying before. Right. He squeezes it in. Yeah.
Right. So like you're saying, your first answer was that Rava goes like
Rab Chanina,
right.
which holds that for matters of your hatzlacha, it's locked in.
And then the other thing is Takis, or what's the famous sense, or why do good things happen to bad people? Why bad things happen to good people and good things happen to, what's the 101 elevator pitch? Sorry, what's
10 seconds, go.
10 seconds. What are they telling the masses now?
I mean, there is no, it's not a 10-second thing. The Rebbe says, no, fakert. You do a 10-second thing, then fakert. You could cause more harm than good, if you know what I mean. But the Rebbe's approach generally was to these, definitely like the Holocaust and things like that, was to say that Torah's, look at Vayichinun Aleph. Chochmas HaTorah explains, has a beer for everything. Chochmas HaTorah does not have a beer for the Holocaust. So there is we can't point to this, that, none of these theories and ideas. Why? Because it's something that it is transcendent, and so therefore there's nothing that forget Seichel Anushi, even Seichel Eleki, the Rebbe is saying, doesn't have it, because it comes from something, so what's there to say? Wir verstehen das nicht.
I like astrology better.
You like astrology?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, this is Barbanel who says, I don't know if I said it before, but Barbanel says, I like Rab Chanina. He says, I like Rab Chanina. Rab Chanina, I know that none of the rabbis hold like him, but I like it. Why? This solves the problem of why bad things happen to good people.
Easy.
That's what he says. But I don't know. The truth is, to me, I don't understand the answer. But Barbanel is moida that the Eibishter created the system that way. So what type of answer is that? The Eibishter did what? He created a world with mazalis in such a way where they influence that some people have a messed up Anechayim Azoina, and then we say, no tightness in the Eibishter. I don't understand that Barbanel. That doesn't. He didn't answer anything. This is what he says.
Some people just get up in the morning and that's it. They're
What?
stuck with it for the rest of their lives.
But the Eibishter made it that way.
Yeah,
This is the answer. Elamai, you're passing it on. So
Right.
sometimes
You're getting
one. Sometimes people are satisfied with that initial thing.
Right.
And I sure had a mice. I love this mice.
We're not
You're not. You guys are sophisticated people. That's why I didn't bring you that Barbanel. But he says, once someone asked my shver, Allah Shalom, Rabbi, are you talking? We'd say, praise the person who takes the skulls of the. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? The skulls of the infants and crushes it against the rock. It's the end of Al Naharis Baba. Read it in the English translation. You'll chap a shudder. How can we say something so vicious like that? So he said, we don't say it on Shabbos. Because we don't say Al Naharis Baba. We say Shem Al. So you guys say, oh, okay, thanks, Rabbi. That was the answer. So sometimes... Alright, so that ends the astrology sugya.
Are you satisfied with the answer or not?
The answer is